Hi everyone, so today I'm going to show you how to derive the contrast codes that we're going to use for SPSS later when we do an ANOVA with contrast codes, but I thought it might be helpful to go over how we get those because I know it can be a little bit confusing. So where we'll start is, remember we have this region of the country data where we're looking at attitudes towards, I think, social assistance as a function of region of the country. Again, this is made up data. But what we have is we have four regions that we're looking at, right? Northeast, Midwest, Southeast, and Southwest. Now with just a one-way ANOVA, just the straightforward ANOVA, we just want to see if any of the means on that, that score of social attitudes towards social assistance, we want to see if those means differ anywhere, right? So the null hypothesis in that case would be that the mean of the first group, which is going to be this one, is equal to the mean of the second, equal to the mean of the third, and mean of the fourth, right? And then an alternative would be that there's some kind of difference somewhere, right? It could be here, it could be here, all of them could be different, but we usually just write not the null, okay? But what we're doing in this case is we're going to set up some planned contrasts. We're going to go, this is a priori, so it's before we do the test, it's a little bit better. We're going to say, based on the research that I've done, I am expecting that the Northeast is going to have a different, significantly different, whether higher or lower, attitude towards social help, bigger or different than the mean of the rest of the country, right? So I want to go ahead, before I even run the ANOVA, I want to set it up so that it's going to compare this to the rest to see if there's a difference there, okay? In that case, we're going to have a little bit of a different null and alternative hypothesis, and this will help us get into how we make our contrast codes. So in this case, the null is going to be that the mean, well, let's do the alternative first. I think that's always better because it's what you want to do, right? So it's easy to write that first. So the alternative hypothesis will be that the mean of the first group, which is Northeast, is not equal to the mean of the rest of them, right? So what we have here will be different from the rest of these, and so it'll be 2 plus 3 plus the mean of the fourth divided by 3, right? We're just saying that this is going to be different from the mean of all of these. And since there are 3 groups, we divide by 3 for that to be the mean. Okay? And then just for the null, it's the same thing except for, it won't be equal to it. So. Okay? So again, the alternative hypothesis is that the mean of the first group is going to be different, so not equal to the mean of these 3 groups. Okay, so what we do is we're going to use the null here. We're going to use this to set up our contrast codes. Okay, so what we'll do is move down here. So what we want to do is we want to set this all on the same side. We want to get this on the same side as the rest of this, and we want to set it equal to 0, and then we'll solve, and then whatever we get in front of each of these terms, each of these mu's, is what we'll use as our contrast codes. So let's go ahead and start that. Okay, so we'll just rewrite this down here. So mean 1 is equal to the average of the others. Okay, cool. So how do we solve for this? So to solve for this, let's multiply by 3 over here, 3 over here. That means this crosses out, and we end up with 3 mu1 equals mu2 plus mu3 plus mu4, and we want them all on the same side, and we want them equal to 0. So to do that, we'll just subtract all of these, and they'll end up on this side, right? So minus mu2 minus mu3 minus mu4. So when we do that, we get 3, you guys can see it, sorry, 3 mu1 minus mu2 minus mu3 minus mu4 equals 0. Okay, and then what we've done here is we're at the point where we can get the weights for our contrast codes, and it's just going to be the number out in front of these terms. So in this case it's 3, and what's in front of here, that's actually a -1, right? So we end up with 3, -1, -1, -1. And we have the first set of contrast codes. Remember, it's important on how you set up your data, because remember, we're looking at Northeast versus the rest of the country, so it depends on how you have it set up. If I scroll up real quick, you can see I had it set up so Northeast, Midwest, Southeast, Southwest. Cool. All right, so this is the contrast code that'll compare Northeast versus the rest of the country. I'm going to move to another page to continue. Sorry about that. Okay, so remember we have it set up Northeast. Make sure I get it right. Midwest, Southeast, and Southwest. And the contrast codes we came up with after solving were 3, -1, -1, -1. All right, cool. So now what we want to do is we just want to fill the rest out. We want to do all the rest of the contrast codes we can do in this experiment. So remember, we can do K-1 contrast codes. In this case, we have 4 groups. So we're going to get 3, so we need just 2 more lines. I also like to use this as a guide to help me figure out how to set these up. So it's kind of like the degrees of freedom you have to work with. You can see here, if I'm going to go to this next line, I've already used up 3 in this case, so I can't do any more comparisons with the Northeast. So what I'll do is I'll put a 0 here. Okay. Now what I want to do, and let's say on this line I want to compare Midwest to the rest of the country. Okay, I can't compare it to this because that's already been done. So I'm going to put a 2 here, a -1, and a -1. Okay, and so if I look here just at the absolute value, and I kind of ignore the sign, I'll see that, look, I have 2 plus 1, that's 3. So I've already used up everything I can use here. I've done all the comparisons I can do with the Midwest. So if I'm going to go on to this last line, I have to put a 0 here, a 0 here, and then now I'm left with just comparing Southeast versus Southwest. And I can do it as a 1, -1. Cool, so now we have all the contrast codes we need for this experiment. So in this first one, we're comparing Northeast versus the rest of the country, average of the rest of the country. In the second one, we're comparing the Midwest to the average of the Southeast and Southwest. And in the last one, we're just comparing Southeast versus Southwest. Cool. Now, again, you can scramble this up if you want. Let's try that again. Let's say I start out and I have some research to suggest that the Midwest is actually going to be different from the rest of the country. Okay, so I'll set it up like this: Northeast, Midwest, Southeast, Southwest. And I want to compare Midwest to everyone else. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to put that 3 here. Okay, and so then following kind of what I showed you before, okay, we need to put a 0 here, right? And then you can kind of decide what you want to do next. Okay, let's say next I want to compare the Northeast versus the Southeast and Southwest, so kind of the North versus the South. So I'll do 2, -1, -1. And again, this has been used up. I've got 1, 2, 3, so I'll put a 0 here, 0 here, and then again I'm left with comparing Southeast versus Southwest. So you can kind of scramble it up however you want, but just make sure that you're not overlapping anything. Make sure they're orthogonal. Okay, so I know this is kind of hard, but I suggest you just keep working with it, keep trying, keep practicing, and you'll get a hang of it. So there is another thing I want to show you. I want to show you how to actually check to make sure these are orthogonal contrast codes, right? We want to make sure that they're not correlated with each other, that they're not taking up the same variance, that they're different from one another. So this is how we'll do that. First thing we do, so a good way to remember it is if you're going across, you're going to add. If you're going down, you're going to multiply. Okay, so this is what we do. I'll put this one down. Actually, I'll just do a nice sheet. Again, across is add, down, multiply. So let's say we have the original one we kind of started with, which was 3, -1, -1, -1. And then I'll fill in the rest just so that we have those here. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do is we are going to add across. Okay, 3 plus -1, -1 plus -1. Add that whole line together, we get 0. Okay, good. That's a good sign. 0 plus 2 plus -1 plus -1, that equals 0. 0 plus 0 plus 1 plus -1. Awesome. So far things are looking good. It looks like we might have an orthogonal contrast code. a set of them. So now what we have to do is we have to multiply down and then add across. Okay, so we do that for each kind of line. So first, let's do that one. Let's multiply down. So if I multiply 3 times 0, I get 0. If I multiply 2 times -1, -2. -1 times -1 is 1. Same thing here. All right, so I've multiplied down. Now I have to add across. I get 0 plus -2 plus 1 plus 1. That equals 0. Awesome. That's good. Now let's compare this one with this last line. So if I do 3 times 0, I get 0. -1 times 0 is 0. -1 times 1 is -1. And -1 times -1 is +1. Add those all up, and I get 0. Awesome. So there's one last thing we need to do. We need to compare the second line to the third line. All right, so we'll do that down here. So we get 0 times 0 is 0. 2 times 0 is 0. -1 times 1, -1. And -1 times -1 is 1. Add those up, and we get 0. Awesome. They are orthogonal. Awesome. Okay, so let's imagine for some reason I put a 1 here, because I wasn't quite sure. I thought, that might work. Well, let's try that real quick. So let's do 3 times 1. I get 3. -1 times 2 is -2. That's 1, and that's 1. If I add that up, sorry about that, that is not 0, right? So it's not orthogonal. That means you've got to go back up here and try that again. Okay. Oh, whoops, I spelled that wrong. There's something in there. Anyway, okay, cool. So that's how you come up with your orthogonal contrast codes, and that's how you kind of check to make sure they're orthogonal. You'll have to do this on the test. So now what I'm going to do is I'll switch to using SPSS, and I'll show you how we can put these codes that we've come up with here. I ignore that. Remember, that's supposed to be a 0. How we've put those into SPSS. Okay, and just a reminder. Let me write these again real fast so you know. In SPSS, so let's say we're going to use these, and then let's say we're going to use those. In SPSS, you're always going to have this first line. It's just kind of a placeholder, okay? And so when you do this in SPSS, it's not going to be in this matrix. At least it won't look like that to you. You're going to do 1, 1, 1, 1, comma, and then this line, right? 3, -1, -1, -1, comma, this next line, comma, this next line. So that's where these are coming from. So you can do these by hand, and then you can plug them into SPSS and run those contrasts that you want. Cool. All right, thanks. So I'm going to stop this video now, and then I will upload the tutorial using SPSS to show you how to do these planned contrasts with an ANOVA. Awesome. Thanks, guys.